first pulmonary rehab program that graduated from Little Company of Mary at the time, graduated in May 1977. And I remember that because that's my hire date at Little Company of Mary Hospital. It was May 1977. I was 8 years old at the time. And this gentleman's name, Jackie, do you remember his name? Glenn Miller. His name is Glenn Miller. He was patient number 1 from rehab class number 1. Back when rehab was 2 hours a day, I believe it was 2 days a week. Jackie and I weren't involved with rehab yet at this point. And it was for 4 weeks. It was modeled after the program at UCSD, but at the time there were no outpatient programs in California. Casa Colina had an inpatient program. There were a couple of inpatient programs for people that were ventilator dependent, and UCSD had an inpatient hope program to get people ready to go home. So it was modeled after the UCSD program, and this was the first man that had the guts to tiptoe and venture into pulmonary rehab. So he's the very, very first graduate of the program. This is Glenn Miller also. He was retired at the time that he went through rehab. And I think, like a lot of people who have retired, I think he kind of had a search for meaning and purpose in his retirement, unlike Kurt. And one of the things that he started volunteering was playing Santa Claus in the pediatrics up at Little Company of Mary. Back when you could do that, and bringing up balloons and little gifts for the children. He found it so rewarding that he started volunteering at other hospitals. He was volunteering at Harbor UCLA and some other hospital out in LA. He ultimately ended up going back to work. And I'll tell you about that in a minute. This gentleman, Jackie, do you remember his name? Oh, she stepped out. She knew I was going to put her. This is Alan Hicks. Yep. This appeared in the newspaper back in the 70s. If you were diagnosed with COPD, we had 2 medications to give you, and they were from the same class of drugs. Now we have 4 different classification of drugs that each have 4 to 6 different drugs in each classification. And back in the 70s, if someone with COPD lived 5 years, that was impressive. That was really, really impressive to have someone that lived for 5 years. I'm so proud to tell you that that has changed, that it's a totally different world right now. And most people with COPD, Terry went through the program 19 years ago. Ruby went through just about the same time. Now people are living so long that they're actually having problems and succumbing to other problems, such as heart disease, uncontrolled hypertension. So now it's managing all your comorbidities. Anyway, it was so unusual to see someone with COPD up and active and doing something that there actually was an article in the newspaper about Alan Hicks getting up and taking care of himself and doing his own housework, even though he had emphysema. That was breaking news. And that's back when the newspapers responded to things like that. This is in February of 1978, and this is pioneer John Eales. He's with his wife, Ann, and he was the first person to come up with the idea, when we're done with rehab, let's not go home and disappear. Let's organize and get together and get to know each other and spend a little time. And kind of before support groups were so common and available, he had the idea, well, let's come back and get together. I think they were coming back once a month for a luncheon that was held in the cafeteria. The original name of the PEP Pioneers was the Company of Pioneers. That's how it started out. But PEP is Pulmonary Education Program, and Pioneers because these people trailblazed the path to where you are today, the first outpatient program in California. Lillian Riley and Mary Mugford in 1979. They were so active in the group. I remember them both. Lillian Riley is the lady on the left, and she was the first historian. She saw the article on Alan Hicks and a few other things that came out and said, well, we got to at least put this in a scrapbook. We have to get hold of this. So she was the first historian, and Mary Mugford was the first one to come up with the idea of a newsletter and getting information out. Even though they were only 2 years old and they had probably graduated maybe 12 patients at the time. Back then, the mindset was on staying together and organizing. On the top is Wayne Cowan. He was described in the document I'm going to show you next as inventive, resourceful, and tireless. He actually became the first editor of the newsletter. And the bottom is Mary Mugford again, who was really big on public relations and getting the word out. Mary Mugford was a very take-charge type of person and helped coordinate the telephone committee and calling people up to remind them of the lunches and sending them a card if they were in the hospital. This has been going on a long time. Oops, that's not what I wanted. That's what I wanted. Okay, this is the dedication written by Lillian Riley, the historian. Can you read it back there? Okay, these three may have battered lungs, but they decided where there's breath, there's life, and there should be continued gatherings of the group. Therefore, the Company of Pioneers was organized by the Pulmonary Education Program graduates in 1978, and we are known as the PEP Pioneers. We love our founders and appreciate their vision. I don't know how to move that down. It's more fun to huff and puff and orchestrate in unison than in loneliness. And it's signed Lillian Riley, historian, 1978 to 1981. Book 1, April 1978 to June 1981. And that's, do you think she had any idea that 36 years later, we would be sitting here still gathering, still huffing and puffing and orchestrating in unison? That what they started back then, you guys are still making happen and following through on. Back when the Old Town Mall used to be the Old Town Mall, they dedicated some walking space to the PEP Pioneers, and we had a group called the PEP Promenade Mall Walkers. This is that first group of people. You can see in the back there is John Eels. Jackie, who's that guy in the front on the right? I should know his name.
Wayne Cowan, isn't it?
Wayne Cowan.
Yeah.
Then there's Lorna Eshborn, the lady on the left in the dark top and the white pants, was the first person that came to us. This is when Jackie and I had become involved in rehab, and said, you know, I wanted to take a cruise and they wouldn't let me get on board the ship with my oxygen. Oh, they wouldn't let you get on board the ship with the oxygen. Why? Oh, they said it's against the law and it's dangerous. And after some intense lobbying and education and letter writing, she took a cruise with her oxygen, and that started the first PEP Pioneer cruise. Anyway, so the mall walkers had their own dedicated space. It was measured. They opened the mall early to allow them to come and do it. And who started the mall walking book? There's Rudy Nordahl, another patient, actually went to each one of the malls and he mapped them out, and he mapped where to park and how to enter the mall and where the measured walking space was, because they were made sure it was not where there was any stairs, like in the Del Amo. He did the Del Amo Mall, he did the South Bay Mall before it was the Galleria, and the Promenade in Torrance, and he had a walking book called Easy Walkers. So if you wanted to go and do your walk at the mall where it's flat and where it's air conditioned, it was easier for you to do it. this is Peppy Pete. This is the logo we still use today. He was created by pioneer Phil Dittmar, whose wife went through rehab. Wasn't it his wife? It was his wife that went through rehab.
Yeah, it was. And he was mild asthmatic also. Yeah.
Okay. He was a magnificent sketch artist, and this is the first Peppy Pete that he came up with. There's several versions. We have the one with walking in the door where he's dragging his feet and leaning over and huffing and puffing and sweating, and he's walking out on top of the world on the outdoor. Even though his wife went through the program, he made Peppy Pete a guy. And to this day, this is the logo that we use and follow up with. This is one of the earliest, I don't know, does it say whether it's the first respiratory rally? The concept of bringing people together and getting people that were in home. Pulmonary patients from around the Southland gathered at Little Company of Mary to participate in the second annual respiratory rally, featuring Donald Tierney, MD, who was hugely known in the field of pulmonary medicine. Noted specialist in pulmonary disease has the keynote speaker. The day's activity also included a panel discussion by a group of physicians specializing in pulmonary rehabilitation and a paced race where patients try to walk a finished course in a predetermined time without shortness of breath. And it wasn't how fast and how quick you can get there, it's who can get there without being short of breath. Okay, I have to prepare everyone for this next picture. Who are those dark-haired young kids?
That's both of us.
Oh my God.
Oh, I love it.
Kurt, quiet.
Last year.
That's right. That's right. That was our exercise gym that Jackie and I are pausing in. We had 2 exercise bikes, and that is it. And the exercise bikes were also in the classroom and our offices, which was one office, certainly bigger than where we are now, but not of any significant size. And Jackie and I, back then, were getting ready to bring in, we would exercise people 2 at a time and work with them, and back before we had even a treadmill.
Wow. You're gorgeous, both of you.
Oh, gee.
That was Mitty Chin.
I call
My misspent youth. Pursed lips breathing was very well known and very well accepted, but nobody really knew the how or why it worked, and there was no clear documentation on what happened. We knew that people felt better when they did pursed lips breathing, and we knew that it allowed them to remain in control of their breathing. You wouldn't slip into that rescue breathing. When you did pursed lips breathing, you're breathing with your whole lung. But we didn't really know about what it did for oxygen saturation levels until we worked with Brian Type. The woman in the picture is Mary Burns. She was a cardiac ICU nurse who was offered the position of starting the pulmonary rehab program, and she is the one that started it. She's with Terry Bearfield. There's some people you never forget 36 years later. That probe on his ear is the oximeter probe. They did not have finger probes back then. We clipped everything onto your ear. And see that oximeter he's pointing at? That was the latest, greatest, highest new technology. That was the first portable pulse oximeter. We did walks with those, didn't we? Have wasn't that one battery operated?
I think our ones that were on our shoulder were.
So that was the latest, greatest new technology, and they're seeing what happens when Terry does pursed lips breathing attached to an oximeter. Now this picture is Dr. Brian Type doing research on pursed lips breathing. This man's name is, I can't remember, a wonderful, lovely man. I don't even have it on my nose. But Dr. Brian Type is the man. Is Art still here? Art? This gentleman in this picture, Dr. Brian Type, the one with the beard, is the one who developed, created, and invented the oximizer cannula. And he is, I love Brian Type. He's a punster. He's got the best sense of humor imaginable. He developed pulse dose oxygen. It was his idea to conserve oxygen, not to save money for oxygen and insurance companies, because back then, quite frankly, you could pretty much do what you wanted to do, but to make your oxygen system last longer so you could be away from home longer. That was the purpose of it then. But this is Brian Type. He always wears a bow tie. And this is Dr. Brian Type and one of our PEP pioneers. And this is going to haunt me because he was a great guy. And the belts strapped around his chest are measuring the movement of the chest as he's doing the breathing. They're actually measuring pressures and movement going on as he's doing the perceptive breathing. Once again, it's the high-tech pulse oximeter and the real high-tech EKG machine there, and the earring probe that goes on the earlobe. Now that man standing up in back is Rich Cassabury. So many of you guys know Dr. Cassabury out at Harbor. This is one of the early studies that he was doing with the PEP Pioneers, because he does research solely on COPD, no other types of lung disease, and primarily on oxygen and exercise were his focus at that point in time. So here he is exercising in his lab some of the PEP pioneers that had volunteered to do research with him. Research was huge back then. The group that you are a part of, the PEP Pioneers, worked with Rich Cassabury and were one of the groups that helped bring Spiriva to market. So you guys are part of the birth of Spiriva, because back when it didn't have the name Spiriva, just the drug name, and when they had to do all their clinical trials and the blind and the double blind and the placebo and switching back and forth, it was you guys, forefathers, who went out to Harbor General faithfully and recorded and used the medications at home and helped bring Spiriva to the market. This, I remember this guy, Charlie Gibney. He did the walk to New York, and he did the walk to Carmel. And what Charlie did was have all the members submit their... We didn't have maintenance exercise at the time. We only had 2 exercise bikes. There was no place and no equipment for maintenance. Oh, could you imagine if they saw what we had today? Because they were delighted with the 2 bikes that they had and this big old giant oximeter. Anyway, so Charlie decided, since we're exercising at the mall and since we're walking and we're supposed to be walking at home on our own to maintain our fitness, I'm going to have everybody write it down. We always record it in time. We don't care about distance. We care about time. They came up to the conclusion that 30 minutes of walking came to 1 mile. He had everybody submit it in a box that says Charlie Gibney Walk, and he would total it and plot it on a map that came to every luncheon so we could see the progress of the PEP Pioneers in mass walking across the United States and coming home through Carmel. When we approached New York City, he wrote a letter to Mayor Koch and told him what was going on and explained it. And the mayor sent us a declaration that we still have today, proclaiming that day in New York City as PEP Pioneer Day, and it was so inspiring and so phenomenal. So then when he had to get us home, he took us by Carmel, because who was mayor of Carmel at that time other than Clint Eastwood? So we got a letter from Clint Eastwood with his autograph on it, welcoming us to Carmel, and what a wonderful thing, and how taking care of your lungs was important. So this is Charlie Gibney that I'm telling you about here. He's taking part of the perceptive breathing studies because learning is so important. Then, actually, the walk had to, like all good things, it had to come to an end. We had to work our way back to Torrance, California. So about the time that we arrived in Torrance, who did he have greet us at one of our luncheons but Mayor Katie Geisert, who presented us in person a declaration that we also still have, proclaiming that day as PEP Pioneer Day and commemorating that. As a group, we walked around the United States and back in the manner of health and fitness. And here she's giving the declaration to Charlie. And it was a very emotional day to him, very emotional day. And we did these rally things for a while because they were fun, and back then they were relatively easy. This is Dr. Brian Type and his daughter Rebecca, who is a master. They are both master musicians. Rebecca's walking home with some of the balloons. Oh, he doesn't have a bow tie on there. That's so unlike him. That's just... Oh, just some clown that wandered in off the street. That's me in the clown costume.
What a fox.
That's me in the clown costume.
What a fox.
It must have been a fast one because I don't have face makeup on. And another rally, we dressed as clowns again. And I had full face makeup on. And when I went to pick my daughter up after work, she totally freaked out and she wouldn't come near me. And she cried and she ran and she climbed on my sister's lap. It was keep the crazy clown lady away. I had to go wash my face before she got it. She didn't even with my voice. Anyway, little Rebecca used to play at the rally. We had about 250 people that would attend. And her first song was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on a quarter-size violin. And in order for her to be seen, we had to put her up on a chair and then get her up on a table so that the people in the auditorium could see her stand there for all the world, this little 4- or 5-year-old girl, and play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on the violin. She's now married, and this is, Rebecca, who is Brian Type's daughter. Next to her in the center is Dr. Brian Type, a little bit more gray in his beard. And next to Brian Type on the left is Dr. Julius Grohlman, who was a radiologist at Little Company of Mary Hospital, did a lot of the heart caths and the high-tech special procedures. Also a friend of Brian Type's and a master musician. So they named themselves Rebecca and a Pair of Ducks.
Oh, that's cute.
Which is why it's spelled that way. So, and they would provide entertainment indefinitely, or as much as we would allow them, as much as time would allow. And still today, when Jackie and I, Dr. Grohlman has retired, and we haven't seen much of him, but when Jackie and I go to our annual conference for the California Society for Pulmonary Rehabilitation, Dr. Type always brings his daughter, and they always provide entertainment. Even today, they play mandolin and violin, and they will walk around the room and be strolling musicians while we're eating, or they'll take over part of the time. They're still together and still performing. Okay, so I told you about Lorna Eshborn being denied passage on a cruise ship because she needed oxygen only at night when she slept. And they were afraid that the ship would explode, that her concentrator would zap too much electricity. They had a ton of reasons why she couldn't, but eventually, after dealing with the Department of Transportation and the cruise lines, and it was arranged that oxygen was totally safe and readily available, and they did allow oxygen to go on board cruise ships. So we had a maiden oxygen voyage in June of 1984. Jackie and I were both on that trip. It was fun. This is Eleanor Hugner. Up in the casino on the Azure Seas. We took it easy. We left from L.A. and came back from L.A. We went down to Ensenada. We stopped at San Diego first and then went down to Ensenada. It was the Monday through Friday cruise. And I've done quite a few cruises, and this was one of the nicest ships I liked because it had so much of the original wood. It was so well made, and the craftsmanship was done. But there was no elevator to the casino. Once you got up there, you had the full casino, and you had a magnificent view of the oceans and the surrounding, but there was no elevator. So people who had told us that, oh, I haven't been able to climb stairs in years, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, when they learned the only way up to the casino was that stairway, they would hunt us down. What did you tell us again about climbing stairs? How are we supposed to do it? Do we inhale? Do we exhale? And every single person who wanted that up there found their way to the top of the casino. And this is Eleanor with her oxygen, and look at that oxygen tank right there. This picture's from 1984.
Wow.
Look familiar? We still use them today. As a matter of fact, that may be one of them. So there she is. She made it to the top of the casino. Going down was not a problem unless you had a few too many. But the patients, everybody had a magnificent time. The staff was exhausted. We got home dead, tired, beat. Because it was the first cruise and we were kind of worried about everybody and wanted to make sure everyone was safe.
Well, we really thought that everybody would be in bed early and we would,
And we'd be out partying.
Yeah, and if you wanted to find them, they're at the Midnight Buffet.
Right, right. The Midnight Buffet. Oh, I wonder if I can find... All of the pictures from the cruise are not digitalized, but on the fancy captain's dinner night, they served baked Alaska, and they turned out the lights, and they paraded around the room, and they very indiscreetly, totally avoided our area of the room, and boycotted us. They changed their path and their route so they didn't get any of that flaming stuff within 50 feet of an oxygen person. But you know, that was okay. They want to do that, that's okay. They still served us. We still got to eat it.
Basically, they were terrified of us.
Basically, they were terrified of us. And I remember going into the gift shop, and someone was talking about all of those people on the ship with vacuum cleaners. Have you noticed how many people are pulling vacuum cleaners with them on the ship? This must be the cleanest ship in the world. And it was like... Oh, I don't know about the cleanest ship, but those are not vacuum cleaners they're pulling. Wonderful memories. Wonderful. And it's true. Jackie and I thought, oh, they'll be in bed by 9 or 10 o'clock at night. They'll be tired. We'll be going out. We'll be hitting the casinos, have some time on our own. No, it was us that was in bed at 9 or 10. And when we needed someone, you know, we'd meet it for breakfast the next morning and say, what did you think about that midnight buffet last night? It's like, you made it for the midnight buffet? I barely made it through dinner. Then they have talent night. They have entertainment night and talent night. So the crew bought their first PEP Pioneer t-shirts, and we got together and we did a performance on the spot. I don't even remember. It was a song that we wrote the words to on a napkin that day. It was a very impromptu. Oh my God. Okay, this is the staff we had back then. Off to the very left is Sue Martin. She was a social worker who was doing her internship with us. Next to that, the second from the left, is Mrs. Tossolini. The third from the left, her name is Maureen Finnerty, and she was coordinating a program that had opened up at UCLA, and she joined us on the cruise. Next to her is Mary Burns, and clever me is hiding behind Joe Rooks, so I really can't be seen, although I'm singing my head out. Next to me on the very far right is Kathy Santoro, was that it? Kathy Santoro, who was with the oxygen company, who donated all the oxygen, so she managed to spin it for the company. You know, since they have our equipment and the oxygen, if there's anything that goes wrong, someone has to be there in case there's a liability issue here. So she managed to get on board and join us. And right in front, of course, hamming it up, is our Joe Rooks, who was one of the administrators at Little Company of Mary, and he was on our branch of the administrative tier, and he's rocking out just because he wanted to go on a cruise, not because...
Didn't we sing, I've been working on the railroad, but we changed the words on the
there was a real common, I thought it had something to do with sailing.
Trying to blow your horn. Something like that.
But we wrote words that had to do with sailing and oxygen.
And we tried to get the crews to blow their horn, but they said they couldn't because it meant there was an emergency out to sea or something. But it was fun.
And liquid oxygen was so prevalent and so common.
Anywhere.
I believe on the first cruise, everyone had their own master one in their cabin to refill themselves, and that's what they slept on. They slept on their liquid oxygen and they filled it up. On subsequent cruises, when they started cutting back a little bit, we had storage rooms, 2 or 3 storage rooms out in the hallways where all of our cabins were located adjacent to each other, where you would go and fill your liquid or have your companion fill the liquid, and in the cabin you used the concentrator. But on this first cruise, everything that we had was liquid. So the first one led, of course, to a second one. This was in 1986. It says the Mexican Riviera, but that's not right. Isn't this the... This has Dr. Soji on it. Isn't this the
Somewhere in between.
the Caribbean?
Caribbean.
This is the Caribbean cruise. I'm almost positive.
I was there, and that's not the one that we have in our office and the classroom is Caribbean.
Oh, okay, so maybe this is the Mexican Riviera. Anyway, the front row, far left gentleman with his feet in the water, wearing the sunglasses. People like to jump on board of these things because they're fun and they're innovative, and it's the first time. That's Dr. Kent Soji, an emergency room physician that said, wait a minute, I hear you're taking cruises and you're bringing oxygen and you're bringing a nurse and you're bringing respiratory therapists. Why aren't you bringing a doctor? And we said, what doctor is going to give up a week of his time to come on a cruise with a bunch of COPDers? And he says, well, you're talking to one who will do that. So we now are bringing our own physician with us, emergency physician, so he can take care of traumas, acute exacerbations, and he brought his own pack of supplies. He didn't want to rely on whatever that ship's doctor had. He brought sutures and gauze and all sorts of drugs and IV tubing and IV fluids and medications, and was delighted when the only thing he treated was one lady who, when the ship listed, bumped. There was an abrasion on her leg that wasn't sutured, but I think it had to be cleaned and washed and bandaged and dressed, and it was like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, they need me, I'm going to earn my keep here, oh boy, oh boy.
Earn my keep.
So he and his wife came with us on this cruise, and had a wonderful time with that. I'm trying to think.
He still works in our ER.
He still does work in the ER. He still does work in the ER. I saw him when I was doing a tracer a couple years ago, and he walked up to me and he greeted me and gave me a big hug and said, are you still doing cruises? I'm still available. I'm retired now. He said, I just got my Medicare card. Oh my God. I guess that is one of life's defining moments when you get your Medicare card. This is the youngest person we ever treated. This is Bill Leveroni. Bill Leveroni, I don't know if there's any pictures on this carousel, I don't remember, but Bill Leveroni celebrated his 21st birthday on that first Mexican cruise that we took down to Ensenada. He had multiple prolonged hospitalizations, and Bill's illness was he had a collagen defect, which meant that the skin's elasticity and the skin's ability to maintain its contour was, his body was rapidly metabolizing the collagen and all the, oh, I hated chemistry in school, let me tell you. Anyway, so it's almost like a premature aging. And the same thing that you see happen to his face with the sagging chin and the sagging cheeks and all that was happening to his lungs. He had what was basically an emphysema of his lungs because the tissue was just sagging and losing all ability to move. Two of his siblings before him died at very young age from this. He was the first one to live this long. He did eventually, by the time he was 23 or so, die of his illness. But surprisingly enough, his parents they had 4 children. 3 of them they lost to this. The 4th one was born without the defect and grew to be healthy and strong and live what I heard, a full life. And this disease was it was found only in their family. That the chemistry of this disease was different than anything else known, and there were many journal articles written about the Leveronis. We didn't care about that. We just loved Bill. So when he was in the hospital, we had Santa Claus and one of his little helpers bring Bill down to the luncheons, which were still being held in the hospital's Center for Health Education in the conference rooms there. Santa and the elf brought Bill down so he could come to the luncheon. Jackie and I, because his spirit and his heart was a 21-year-old boy, after he turned 21, Jackie and I would pick him up on Friday and Saturday nights and bring him down to the lighthouse, where we had arranged with the management. I had an in with the band and the management. We would arrange for them to, if you've ever been to the lighthouse, right on the sidewalk, there's that one door that splits open. And we arranged for him to have a table right there with the top part open, because you could still smoke in public places back then. So this way, once he sat down and his saturations, we didn't have finger saturations. Jackie and I would just kind of look at his coloring. When it looked like he had caught his breath, we'd have him take his oxygen off. And for that night, he was a 21-year-old kid out bar hopping with a couple of older cougar chicks.
Also, we would tell him, you get up to an hour of walking, you're going to be out there dancing with us. He goes, oh, no, I'm not doing that. He was just a wonderful, wonderful young man. We were blessed to know him.
Is that you, Jackie?
That's
me.
Jackie.
That's me. He's just a beautiful
And that's
young man.
Bill.
I'm honored to have been his friend.
When you'd walk in the room to see Bill, who spent weeks and weeks and weeks trachting on ventilators and the first thing he would always say is, how's so-and-so doing? Have you heard from so-and-so? He thought only of other people, never, ever, ever himself. It was a pleasure to know him. And this is what the PEP luncheons look like. Oh my God. Look at that white-haired lady in the middle of the room. Is she still here?
Oh.
That's Terry Nielsen. She hasn't changed much, has she?
Oh.
Let's see. Next to her, this way, on her left, on our right, is Pat Coldiron, who was one of our very first lung transplant patients. She had a double lung transplant, and she had such a profoundly rare blood type, and she was very petite. The surgeons told us kind of confidentially, we'll never find a match for her, because her blood type is so bizarre, and with lungs, size is everything. You can't put big lungs in a small body, and you can't put small lungs in a big body. And surprisingly enough, they found a donor in San Francisco and flew the lungs down to her, and because there was no one else that needed them, she got both lungs. This was, I don't have a date on this, but she's still alive today. She's 16 or 17 years out on her lung transplant. Very amazing. So that was a luncheon over in the hospital when we had them there. Well, our cruises got scaled back a little bit because prices started going up and the hospital had other focus for us. So now we're doing Catalina Island, but we're glad to do it. And we still have the oxygen there, and those are different systems. That's from the Liberator system, but it's still liquid oxygen that's there. We would have laughed in your face if you would have told us we were going to lose our liquid oxygen and be on E-tanks. Oh, we would have poked fun at you and just said, never, never. They're just not practical. It won't happen. So this is boarding the boat to Catalina. And this is on the high seas to Catalina. That's one of our members, Barbara Webb, who was very active and involved. And she's roaming the ship. It reminds me of the Whale Watch cruise we just took. And this is at Catalina. On the right is Jeannie Rife. Her husband was in group number 2 or 3 from the very beginning. Jeannie and her husband, John Reif, were very active members, and that's Jeannie there now. She was the secretary and the treasurer. She sat on the board of directors for at least 15 years, and she was Ruby's predecessor in wearing so many hats and doing so many things. She traveled, she arranged so much of the travel and the trips and all that for us. Next to her in the middle is Roger Lape, and then his wife was on the other side, Eleanor. Roger was our chairman of the board for probably about 10 years, and there's lots of documentations and stuff about Roger. Then we started doing bus trips down to the Del Mar racetrack. Here we're loading patients and wheelchairs and liquid oxygen back there. We always took the nuns with us. They love to gamble.
Oh, really?
They love to gamble. And they would each fork in 50 cents or $1 and bet together. And they would bet win, place, or show, because we used to always see the nuns in the winner's line collecting their money. And it was like, one day I remember asking, Sister Terrence, do you have a little divine intervention you want to share with the rest of us? No. So I found out they were doing the minimum bet for win, place, or show, and they'd always bet the favorite. So it was pretty much a done deal. They were going to be up there a lot. The Better Breathers Clubs, by now pulmonary rehab is catching on. There's many outpatient programs in California. It's actually thriving. There's actually more programs back at this time, I think, than there are today, because quite a few programs have closed and gone under. Pulmonary rehab is not a moneymaker. You have to sell the service and not plan on making money on it. But the Better Breathers Clubs down in San Diego organized a day at the races at the Del Mar racetrack every year in August. And every single year for more than a decade. We went a couple years ago.
About 17 years, I think, was my first trip.
Your first trip was to the Del Mar racetrack? Okay. They used to be about 300 people. They would have cakes. We had the infield area that's shaded, and right next to the bedding windows and bathrooms are there, and the big video screens if you wanted to walk to the rail. It was a long day, and those trips were hugely popular, but they came to an end when other Better Breathers classes, other groups started dropping out for various reasons, or the group was disbanded, or the program was closed. And the last 3 or 4 times we went, we were the only group going. You guys are amazing. You hang out there. But it was actually the price of gas and getting the bus and the tickets. It just became unaffordable for most people at that point. It became an expensive trip. This is the Del Mar racetrack. My daughter and I someone wrote that pointed at me because I wasn't allowed to go on the Mexican Riviera trip because the trip was in September and I was due to deliver a child in October. Although Dr. Soji said a delivery at sea would be fine at him, he felt totally confident delivering a baby. I mean it, Betsy, you can go if you want. Well, my obstetrician and my husband were not too excited about that idea, so I did stay home for that one. But I got to go to Del Mar in August, even though I was quite pregnant at the time. And here we're getting ready, loading the bus out at Little Company of Mary. I recognize the back of the guy in the beige dreams. It's Terry Bearfield. And in front of him, that looks like Glenn Gary. He was another respiratory therapist that would come out and help us get on and off and lift oxygen and stuff like that. And once at the infield, we had lots of wheelchairs at our access so that we could... It's before they granted us permission to use the shuttles. How could I ever forget? The bus that loaded us at the handicapped area dropped us off there, but we had to go down a hill under the racetrack, up another hill, and into the infield area, which was probably a quarter mile, without an exaggeration, because it was at the far end was the canopy and the area. So it was the wheelchair parade. We wheeled everybody in, and we wheeled them out. Back when we were young and strong.
Thank God we were young.
Put the oxygen between their feet and we took off. And this is Florine Love. Anne left. I wonder, her husband was also a professor at El Camino College. I wonder if she knew Anne and Ed. And behind there, Zola Ayers. And of course, bedding was the thing of the day, and some people had it down to a science of what horse, what jockey, when they had their Lasix, da-da-da-da-da. And Jackie and I are saying we liked the color of their silks, or the color of the horse, or that's a catchy name, I like that name. Didn't seem to matter, but it's another chance for group cohesiveness and togetherness, and getting out of the house and active and remaining engaged in life. Well, I don't remember the details, but two people from our group were selected to be at the winner's circle and present flowers to the owner. Is it the owner that gets the flowers when the horse wins? Well, I didn't know if it was the jockey or the trainer, smarty pants. I would have given them to the horse. He did all the work. And he wears a little thing. Smart. But the woman in this picture is Dawn Dieterle. Dawn Dieterle is someone that was worthy of all the awe-inspiring that she got. Dawn was young when she was diagnosed with COPD. She was in her early 40s. She was a very heavy smoker. She was a very active woman. Her concept of a good full life is working 2 jobs, going out afterwards, going dancing, getting up after 3.5 hours sleep, working her 2 jobs. When she was disabled with her lung disease, she was devastated. She couldn't work anymore. She had quit smoking. She was vivacious. She was the first person we knew that had a lung volume reduction done. And after she had her lung volume reduction, that's when they take the largest part, the most hyperinflated part of the lung, the dead part of the lung that's non-functioning and just taking up space, and they remove that part of the lung so the healthier part can expand into that area and breathe better. And they still do it today on certain candidates. It was hugely successful with Dawn. But back then, because she was one of the first ones to have it done, we didn't know it was only good for 3 to 5 years. Then there would be progression, and then she would become short of breath again. But she actually got off her oxygen. And she told me that when she woke up in the recovery room after the surgery, as she's coming out of the anesthesia, the very first thought was, I can breathe, I can take a deep breath. She said that she noticed immediately that she was breathing better, and in the recovery room, before they even wheeled her to the ICU, they did a chest x-ray to see what was going on now that she was closed up. And the chest x-ray that they took, because we got the reports of her records from the hospital and the doctor, showed such a reversal in how her diaphragm was better positioned and working better now, and how she had healthier areas in her lungs, and she was off her oxygen within 2 or 3 days. But when her lung volume reduction started to age out on her and she became short of breath again, that was not daunting to her at all. She went out and she immediately applied for a lung transplant. And after being rejected at several places, she never took no for an answer. She was accepted, and she did ultimately get a lung transplant. At USC, I believe it was. USC. That lasted her about 5 or 6 years when she started having some kidney problems. And it was actually kidney disease that she died from. But she managed, between the 2 procedures, to add at least 10 years of active life that she wouldn't have traded for anything, for all that she went through. She was just a vivacious, wonderful, inspiring woman. And we captioned that the winner circle because she was just a winner all the way around. Yeah, she was amazing. And then this is another respiratory rally when we left the hospital and went to the Torrance Meeting Hall down on Madrona. Just general attendance. It's like, yep, we really had them. And this was our committee. Another set of clowns. So off to the right in the black cowboy hat is Jeannie Rife that I told you about, active in everything. Next to her in the blue wig is Hilda Corliss. Hilda was born and raised in a small little village in England, and Hilda never smoked. But she had chronic bronchitis and some bronchiectasis because her husband smoked, and from the day she was born until they came to the United States many years later, their building was heated by wood, by a wood furnace. So she had all of that she was breathing too. Very wonderful lady. Next to Hilda in the purple and yellow clown costume. Who's that clown, Ruby? I think I know. I recognize her. That is our own Ruby Ritchie right there in her clown costume. Next to Ruby is a coordinator. I don't recognize who that is. Someone from another program or... It might be, because she would definitely, that was Brian Type's coordinator.
Yeah, I think it's Mary Barnett.
So when it comes to getting dressed up and being silly and being zany and having fun, PEP Pioneers have always known how to do that. Okay, this is a local barbershop quartet. Let me see if I wrote down the name. I didn't write it down in their notes. But the gentleman on the left in the green and white stripes was John Ard. He was also chairman of the board for a while. And he was oxygen dependent, obviously. And he performed at this rally with his barbershop quartet because his passion in life was singing, and he liked to sing barbershop. And they actually, if I remember correctly, were award-winning and fairly well known in the area. So when they came and sang for the respiratory rally we had, his three other members of the group, it's hard to see in this picture, but all three of them are wearing oxygen cannulas that they just kind of taped to the one thing so that they were in partnership with him, appearing with oxygen in public and singing in spirit, even though they didn't medically need it. They're all wearing oxygen cannulas to be with John. Rose Jacobson and Jack McCullough at another respiratory rally. They were the popcorn servers and the popcorn poppers taking care of that event. You notice that these events are never put on by Jackie and I. They're always put on by you guys. It's like we show up and do our part. So by now Joseph has joined us, and there's Jackie. And Ruby again is there with Jeannie Rife, taking care of the head count and the bookwork and the logistics of the event, keeping the balances going and the attendance up to date, but always stopping and taking time for a photo and a smile. Then the last rally we had, we did it big time. We moved up to the Los Verdes Country Club in Palos Verdes, and we rented the entire room up there, and we hired a casino company to come in, and we had a casino day. Because everybody liked to gamble. It was against the law in Torrance. It was against the law in Redondo. The only place it was legal that we could do it was in Palos Verdes, so we drove all the way up to Los Verdes Country Club. And as you can see, they're playing craps. We have an e-tank. What's that e-tank doing there? Oh, this is probably when we were starting to see things phased out. We had vendors outside that helped pick up some of the expenses and the cost of this. We had lunch. There's Terry again off to the left, playing roulette. She's next to Mike, Barbara White's partner. And there is Billy Gaynor and Artie Gann. And the redhead is Patrice?
Yes.
Patrina, who went through Torrance's program and then came through our program and was very active on the board of directors. Patrina's aunt, Thelma, still comes to some of our luncheons. She was here a couple months ago. Thelma Sewell is this member, Patrina's aunt. And she's in her mid-90s now, but she'll periodically show up and come. Now, how cool is it to sit down and play 21 with your pulmonary doc as a dealer? That's Dr. Chang. We talked him into dealing, because we had to pay the dealers and the people to do that. So we had Dr. Chang and I think Dr. Landis that sat down and they dealt, and it was so funny because Dr. Chang really didn't know what he was doing. How do I play this game now? How many cards do I deal them? What are they supposed to add up to? You know, and I think some of the people at the table were helping him out. Say, oh no, I haven't said him. He doesn't get a card yet. But it was fun, and he had the time of his life doing it. And that is a younger Dr. Chang dealing 21 across the table to some of his very own patients. This is Dorothy Hall. She was on the board of directors for quite a few years, one of the movers and shakers. She got to the point with her oxygen that Dorothy had COPD and she had lung cancer, and she had her entire right lung removed to treat the cancer, and survived for 12 or 15 years on her smaller lung that had COPD in it. And she not only survived, she thrived and got to a point where she could go without her oxygen if she were sitting and resting or doing something, if she were in a movie or a dinner house. And you try and take it away from her. You try and tell her she can take it off while she's working this table. It's like, oh, you're not taking my oxygen away from me. Oh, that's not going to happen. Okay. So here she is, selling cookbooks that her and her friend put together and compiled recipes. She had everyone in the group submit their favorite recipes, and they put them in this cookbook, and they had it printed, and they had it bound, and they sold them everywhere. They sold them at their church, they sold them at our lunches, they sold them at our rallies, at our bingo. Mary Marsh used to laugh and said, did you see me in my red dress at night under the streetlight on the corner? No, I don't want to hear about that. Thank you very much, Dorothy. And that right there is her. That is Dorothy with the cookbook and all the money that she's made selling it at this rally. The money, of course, went into the PEP Pioneer Treasury. First maintenance class that we had, we kind of decided that since people were so good about staying together and the exercise was so incredibly important, that we really needed to get a maintenance exercise thing going. So what finer place than in the convent chapel? Well, the nuns weren't using it anymore. They were just built, a new one had just been completed, and it was an empty room being used for storage. So we got them to take all of the storage out. And we moved. By now we had a couple of treadmills that were, some of them were left over from physical therapy. Some of them were donated by very grateful and gracious patients. That is Terry again on the left, third one back. She was an active mover and shaker, I'm telling you, she always has been. With her back to us in the stripes is Pat Blay, another transplant patient. And we did our first exercise in the gym, which was interesting because it still had the stained glass windows in. And in the confessionals, we used as changing rooms for people that wanted to change their clothes for whatever reason. They'd go, or else if someone were misbehaving, we would look them in the eye and say, I'm going to send you into the confessional if you don't shape up.
And we sat at the altar.
We sat at the altar.
So we had desks done around the altar. So
I'll bet Ruby's in that picture somewhere, because Ruby and her husband George were regular attendants. And of course, so much for Persips breathing, because when there's a good story to be told, John Ard and Mary Marsh are going to make sure that it gets told. Those treadmills we inherited from cardiac rehab. This was the cardiac rehab gym that we started using it during their off hours. And this is the first strength and balance class. We had a video called Chair Aerobics. And we had more members attending the exercise session than we had equipment. So we would plug this video in and put up some chairs, and people would watch TV and do the chair aerobics. We didn't have bands at the time. We did have some weights that we used. You can see the TV off to the left. And it was from there, that was how we started Strength and Balance. Then we moved to Beach Cities and Redondo Beach, where we had more space than we knew what to do with. Thank God, those were good days. And we had our own area for Strength and Balance, and we plugged the video in, and people would do that, the chair aerobics, while they were waiting. And one day, Cynthia came walking through, and she said, I could teach that class. I do that all the time in my exercise session. Okay, since you opened your mouth, we'll let you do it. And Cynthia took over, and that's how what we have today came to fruition, from this small little group of people watching a TV and doing the Strength and Balance there. And after we started measuring outcomes with our certification, we saw huge increases in people's exercise ability and strength and endurance. And Dr. Storer, yeah, Tom Storer, he was the director of exercise sciences and physiology at El Camino for many, many years. He has now retired, and he has special adaptive PE classes out there for persons who are differently abled or differently challenged, who are disabled, whatever the correct term is today. And one of them was for COPD patients. He had a special exercise program for COPD patients where, for the course tuition, which back then was like $2 or $3 a unit, and the parking fee, you got to exercise in his gym with him and with the students all semester. Problem was, the walk was pretty far. The gym is located in the center of the campus. It's a flat walk, but by the time you got in there, you had pretty much gotten your exercise. He even got dedicated parking for our members. But Masquerade Madness was going back then. This woman came as a California raisin, and it's hard to see, but she is wearing oxygen as she's doing it. And she came in carrying a boombox and had that song, I Heard It on the Grapevine. And she was a California raisin. The guy on the right is another transplant patient. He was a local dentist that had a single lung transplant for pulmonary fibrosis. And then John Ard again. And this is our Redondo Beach location. We now had lots of equipment. It was old. And we were just starting to utilize the new step and see, what is this? How can this help us? Now we know it helps us hugely. And this is the little sewing circle where we sit and wait while we're doing the equipment or visiting with each other. Somewhere out there, I can guarantee you there is coffee and cookies. Paula was a patient of ours that had what is called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, which meant that she had a congenital defect that made her very prone to her emphysema. The protein that's secreted by the liver to keep the lungs healthy and to fight off the free radicals was missing in her. And she, in this case, you get emphysema very severely at a very young age. And she was having a time where the replacement therapy, you can get some replacement therapy. It's hugely expensive, but it was available. But for a time there was a quality issue problem, and that the replacement therapy was not available. And the people that couldn't get the Prolastin got sicker. They got more short of breath and they got sicker. So during that time, Paula was pretty undaunted. And she was having difficulty exercising. She was struggling with just the oxygen. So she said to us one day, can I bring my CPAP machine in, or my BiPAP machine? Because that will help breathe for me, and I think I'll be able to do better. We love that idea, and let her bring it in. And this is her doing exercise attached to a BiPAP, which is a type of non-invasive ventilator that when she breathes in, it fills her lungs for her. And when her lungs are filled, they exhale automatically. So it's a breathing assisting device. And she used it to exercise with. And we had rowing machines, and the group is growing. Harry Holcomb, that's him. See what exercise did for him? This is one of the first places that we got to. This is where we are right now, so it had to be 2010 or so. That was when we moved into our current location. And this is still those are the new equipment. We got new equipment when we moved in there. And we're still going to find a way around all the equipment to do what we can for the strength and balance and the exercise. PEP picnics. This was when we were still at Wilson Park. And we left Wilson Park because during the summer it just became that all of the kids' camps would go there and have lunch, and it just became overrun with kids, and the parking was really difficult. It was hard to get parking there. The other issue was shade. Shade was hard to come by. But when it comes to a bingo prize, it doesn't matter what the prize is. The fact is you won, and people are standing there scrutinizing for the best prize there. Look at that. Edna Murphy. She left. Did she leave? Oh, well, she's going to be sad. I'll have to show her this when I see her again. Because I have a picture coming up soon of her husband, Bob. There's Ruby. There's Bev Poston. There's Edna. Behind Edna is her name Kathy? Bergeron, but Julie Bergeron. And across from Julie Bergeron is Beth Riley, who moved to Texas to be closer to her family. And this is the picnic at our current location. And besides bingo, is that a cribbage board? And there's Jackie and June. And I love that wheelchair with the flag on it. We had a dinner, Tony's on the Pier quarterly. It was arranged by Karen, who's the woman leaning over there. And it was fun. It was a Friday night dinner. We did them quarterly. A little bit of a walk. Oh, the ice cream social. Are these guys still here? The ice cream social. There's Dan. There's Paul. That's Paul. Behind Paul, it's Don and Evie Hill are there. And Pat McCullough. Wonderful event. Stan and Bud Murphy, two longtime members, jokesters. There were three of them together that we had to keep them apart because when the three of them together, they got into trouble. These guys would do turnarounds to Las Vegas. They would get up in the morning, they would pack the van full of oxygen, they would drive to Las Vegas, they'd gamble and play, according to Bud, until they ran out of money. Then they'd turn around and drive home and just had a wonderful time. That is Bob Murphy. That is Edna Murphy's husband. He came to us for rehab way before Edna did. Edna was still working. We heard about her. He was the first one that we knew of that learned how to strap his oxygen in his bicycle basket and would ride up and down the Strand to get exercise wearing his oxygen. So that's Bob Murphy, Edna's husband. This is Joan Tofilski. We called her the Green Pioneer because she lived a couple miles away, but when she parked her car and started doing every errand that she could on her bicycle with her basket, including coming to rehab. So she would ride her bike to rehab, then she would exercise, and then she would ride her bike back home. And it's because of Joan. Joan passed away because of liver disease, not her lung disease. Notice how often that happens? It's because of Joan that got so much benefit from exercise and always sang the praises of exercise that when she passed on, her friends and family started a foundation, a fund at Little Company, to sponsor people that could not afford to exercise. She did not want money to ever be a reason for people to not come exercise. So she had donations made to it. They started it off with $10,000 or something like that. And today, to this day, we still are able to provide exercise services for those who cannot pay for it because of this woman right here. This is Barbara Webb and Al, and this is showing how you can go swimming in a pool. They used to fill their portables and take their long cord from inside the house. They would attach the long cord to their portable, put it poolside, and do laps in the pool and sit in the pool and just do anything else in the pool that anyone would do, only they were able to do it with their oxygen. And this is, her last name is Ruth Brand. This is Ruth Brand up at, I forget how many feet, fishing with her oxygen. In that backpack, she's got her oxygen tank, and she's wearing a cannula. And she always made it very clear that she was fishing, not necessarily catching. But she was out there doing what she wanted to do because she was wearing the oxygen and able to do it. Dorothy Willoughby was one of our longtime members who was actually on a ventilator at night. Dorothy's problem was her scoliosis was so severe it squeezed her lungs, and her lungs had no room to breathe. During the day, she was fine on oxygen. At night, to give her a rest and to improve the quality of her sleep and her oxygenation, she just attached herself via trach tube to the ventilator, and she did very well for a very long time. You've seen him lately. He's been coming back to the gym. That's Jasper, Redondo Union High football coach. He's also a musician, a very talented bass player. He toured with the Imperials. Who was it that was with the Imperials? He toured the United States, and he was a studio musician on a couple of albums. And that's Jasper with his oxygen. This is the plant doctor down at the Begonia Farms, Jack Bauman, who would wear his oxygen while he was helping to guide people on maintaining and managing and keeping their begonias healthy. That's Elizabeth Conley. These were from a magazine, actually a book that they did on pulmonary rehab, who's not wearing her oxygen at the time, but she is gardening and living a full life. And there's two longtime members, John Hart and Libby Christensen, at one of the events that was going on, and just delightful. This was a respiratory rally. The theme was Sweet 16, and this is Joan, the exercise lady, and Harry dancing. There was no room to dance inside the main auditorium, so they're just kind of out in the little entryway, dancing out there. Betty Harb is on the right, wearing her oxygen. Cesar Romero.
Gail Edwards in the middle.
Oh, that's Gail Edwards in the middle. God, it does kind of look like Gail.
That's what I thought.
Actually, she was at a dinner theater. She had the opportunity, I don't remember the entire story, but she had the opportunity to meet him. She had just seen his show. She was a retired nurse, obviously on oxygen. And most people, when the big event, the big photo comes up, will take their oxygen off. And she couldn't have cared less. She just wanted to spend as much time as she could next to Cesar Romero with his arm around her. So the name the celebrity comes from. In our book, she was the celebrity, not him. There's Terry again. Terry Nielsen at one of our Masquerade Madnesses. And when she first came in, it took me probably 2 or 3 minutes. She wouldn't speak. And to figure out who that really was the smile that gave her away. The one thing in common, this was at, I think,
Happy hour.
was it happy hour or was it Carol's 50th birthday party? It was an event at one of the restaurants across the street from the hospital. The big thing that these women all have in common is they were all lung transplant recipients that went to rehab together before they got their lung transplants, and kind of one at a time. Pat was the first. Pat on the left was the first. Pat Blay in the middle was the second, and then Sharon Foster was the third. But these people were all post-lung transplant. They were off their oxygen. They were doing great. And then, of course, making a total fool of herself is our wonderful Ruby Ritchie. This was Carol's 50th because it's the 50 on the napkins and we have the confetti on the table. And in the middle is another lung transplant patient. Sharon Foster, yeah. With Ruby, just being Ruby and having fun. Ruby again with Faye, who now is in Hawaii, living on Kauai, and Michael Bergeron. And of course there's food involved. And these two were in the same class together and didn't see each other for a long time until they found themselves, quite by accident, sitting side by side at one of our Christmas parties here in this room, and just were so delighted to see each other again. When I saw that embrace, I just had to take that picture. I just love that picture. One of the respiratory rallies, I forget what the theme was, but Jackie is Alice in Wonderland, and Joseph and I are the king and queen of hearts. The things you do to earn a living. Yeah, Yolanda Weiss on the right, Rita Long in the middle, and Ruby tipping her glass.
You know, there's like gambling and alcohol in a lot of these pictures.
And always food. Always, always food.
And fun.
And fun. So that's it. That's 35 years. You guys are an amazing group. That's all I have to say. An amazing group.
You rock. You guys rock.
And now we have all new leadership with Dan Buck taking over as president of the PEP Pioneers Board of Directors. We have Art and his wife Pat Cottrell. We have all new leaders, and it still happens. You guys are just amazing. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you at exercise tomorrow.